Ava Johnson walked into the grand lobby of the Belmont building, her heels clicking softly against the polished marble floor. She carried herself with quiet confidence, her designer handbag resting on her arm, her tailored suit a perfect fit. She had been here before, but today felt different. The moment she approached the reception desk, she felt the shift in energy. The receptionist, a middle-aged man with neatly combed hair, barely glanced up at first. But as his eyes fully landed on her, his expression changed, his polite indifference turned into something colder, more calculating. He scanned her from head to toe, his gaze lingering as if searching for something to confirm his suspicions. Ava had seen this look before. It was the look of someone who had already decided who she was before she even had a chance to speak. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone clipped, almost dismissive. "I have an appointment with Mr. Calloway," she replied smoothly, meeting his gaze without hesitation. The receptionist's brows furrowed slightly. "With Mr. Calloway," he repeated, as if the idea was absurd. "Yes. He's expecting me," Ava confirmed, pulling out her phone to check the time. Most people would have taken her at her word. After all, she spoke with certainty, her posture was composed, and she looked every bit like a professional who belonged in such a place. But instead of simply checking the appointment list, the receptionist leaned forward, his skepticism deepening. "I'm going to need to see some identification," he said, his voice firm. Ava blinked. She glanced to the side and saw other guests, mostly older men in expensive suits, walking past the desk without being questioned. Some gave a polite nod to the receptionist, who let them through without a second thought. Her jaw tightened, but she forced herself to remain composed. "Do you ask everyone for ID, or just me?" she asked, her tone calm but pointed. The receptionist hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "It's just protocol," he muttered, though they both knew it wasn't true. Ava exhaled slowly, suppressing the frustration that threatened to rise. She had fought these silent battles before, the ones where she had to prove, again and again, that she deserved to be in the same spaces as everyone else. With a steady hand, she reached into her bag, pulled out her ID, and placed it on the desk. The receptionist examined it for longer than necessary before finally nodding. "You can go up," he said, though his tone lacked the warmth he had offered to others. Ava took back her ID, her fingers gripping it a little tighter than before. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the elevators, her head held high. She would not let this moment define her, but she would not forget it either. Maya sat upright in the sleek, modern office, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive cologne, and the soft hum of distant conversations buzzed through the glass walls. She had just finished her final interview, and her heart still pounded with the adrenaline of it all. She had done everything right, answered each question with confidence, highlighted her achievements without sounding arrogant, and even managed to make the recruiter chuckle once or twice. She had walked in feeling prepared, hopeful. Now, sitting across from the hiring manager, she could feel a shift in the air. The man in front of her, a middle-aged executive with neatly combed hair and a crisp navy blue suit, exhaled slowly as he glanced at her resume one last time. His fingers tapped against the glossy surface of his desk before he finally looked up. His smile was polite, practiced. "Maya," he began, his voice smooth but tinged with something she couldn't quite place. "You have an impressive background, truly. We appreciate the time you've taken to go through our hiring process." She knew where this was going. She could feel it creeping in like a storm on the horizon. "But," he continued, leaning slightly forward, "after careful consideration, we've decided to move forward with another candidate. While your skills are strong, we just don't feel you're the right fit for our company." There it was. That phrase. Those carefully chosen words designed to soften the rejection but leaving it just vague enough to avoid any real explanation. Maya felt the weight of disappointment press against her chest, but she refused to let it show. She straightened her shoulders, keeping her expression composed. "May I ask what specifically led to this decision?" she asked, her voice even, though she could feel the sting behind it. The recruiter hesitated, just for a second. A small pause, but one that spoke volumes. His smile remained, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's really just a matter of company culture," he said. "We're looking for someone who aligns more closely with our vision." She had heard it before. The same excuse, dressed up in different words. It wasn't about her qualifications. It wasn't about her experience or skills. It was something else, something unspoken. Maya's eyes flickered to the glass walls of the office, where she could see the employees moving about, men and women dressed in nearly identical shades of gray and blue, their laughter easy, their movements synchronized like a well-rehearsed performance. They all looked the same. Spoke the same way. Fit into the same mold. She didn't. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her handbag resting on her lap. She could argue, push for an answer she knew they'd never give. But what would be the point? Deep down, she already understood. For a moment, she considered how much she had wanted this job. The late nights spent preparing for interviews, the excitement she had felt when she received the callback. And now, all of it reduced to a polite rejection wrapped in corporate jargon. Slowly, she stood, smoothing out the fabric of her blazer. She extended her hand, meeting the recruiter's gaze with unwavering steadiness. "Thank you for your time," she said, her voice firm, giving nothing away. As she walked toward the exit, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor, she felt the sting of rejection settle deep in her chest. But with every step, another thought began to form, something steady, something stronger than disappointment. She wasn't the right fit for them. But maybe, just maybe, they weren't the right fit for her either. The moments stretched endlessly, each second dragging out as if time itself had conspired against Mia. The lively chatter that had filled the room just moments ago had vanished, leaving behind a suffocating silence. The weight of dozens of eyes pressed down on her, their gazes flickering between confusion, awkwardness, and something worse, pity. She had spoken with such confidence, believing that her joke would break the ice, that her comment would add to the conversation. But now, as an uneasy tension settled over the group, she realized her mistake. Her heart pounded, her fingers curling into her palms as a wave of heat crept up her neck. The silence wasn't just awkward, it was condemning. Someone shifted in their seat. A few exchanged glances, lips pressed together as if searching for the right way to move past the moment. Finally, someone cleared their throat. Anyway, a voice cut through the silence, desperate to steer the conversation elsewhere. Laughter followed, but not for her. It was forced, polite, and worst of all, distant. It washed over her, around her, but never included her. She wasn't a part of the joke, she was the joke. Mia forced a smile, nodding along as if nothing had happened, as if her stomach wasn't twisting itself into knots. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her glass of water, just to have something to do. But even as the conversation returned to its natural flow, her mind refused to let go. The moment replayed over and over, every second of it sharper than the last, embedding itself deep in her thoughts. She knew she would think about this later, when she was alone, when the lights were off, when she was supposed to be sleeping. And she knew, without a doubt, that long after everyone else had forgotten, she would still be reliving this moment in excruciating detail. Daniel had always prided himself on his ability to size people up quickly. In his line of work, it was essential to make snap judgments. He had to know who was truly capable, who was worth the investment, and who would be an asset to the team. His decisions were often instinctual, based on appearance, speech, and demeanor. He had grown comfortable with this process, believing that it made him efficient and effective. So when Emma walked into his office that rainy Tuesday morning, his mind was already made up before she had even said a word. Her clothes were modest, a little too casual for his tastes, and her accent carried a lilt that suggested she wasn't from around here. Her presence felt out of place. She didn't have the polished look of someone who belonged in their high-powered industry. He mentally marked her as someone who would be difficult to integrate, someone who might even clash with the rest of the team. As she sat down across from him, Daniel couldn't help but notice the slight nervousness in her eyes, the way her hands fidgeted with the hem of her jacket. He interpreted this as uncertainty, a lack of confidence, and internally wrote it off. He didn't give her a chance to really speak before he began to make his assumptions. Emma's credentials were impressive on paper, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't the right fit for the company's culture. He was certain that she wouldn't blend in well with the rest of the team. Her ideas, though insightful, seemed too radical, too different from what they usually did. He couldn't see her as part of the established, successful formula they had built. With each passing moment, he grew more certain. When the interview ended, he shook her hand firmly, but there was no warmth in his grip. "Thank you for your time," he said, his voice polite but distant. "We'll be in touch." In his mind, the decision was already made. He had moved on, and Emma's chances had slipped through his fingers without a second thought. Days passed, and Daniel's life continued on its usual course. He focused on his work, his projects, and the relentless cycle of meetings and deadlines. Yet, something lingered in the back of his mind, a small, nagging feeling that he couldn't quite place. It wasn't until weeks later, during a team meeting, that the full weight of his earlier decision hit him. The company was facing a significant challenge. A competitor had just launched a groundbreaking project that was causing ripples in the market. The concept was startlingly familiar, almost identical to the ideas Emma had shared during her interview. Ideas that, at the time, Daniel had dismissed as too unconventional. His stomach churned as he stared at the details, realizing that Emma's perspective, the one he had so quickly disregarded, could have been the key to solving the very problem they were now facing. He remembered the way she had talked about fresh approaches, new ways of thinking, and the courage to push boundaries. He remembered how her eyes had sparked when she spoke about shaking up the industry and finding untapped potential. And yet, Daniel had been so blinded by his preconceived notions, by his assumptions about her background and appearance, that he hadn't given her the chance to prove herself. The realization settled over him like a heavy weight. He had passed on a visionary because of his own biases. Emma had come into the room with an openness, an innovative mindset, and the kind of energy that could have propelled the company forward. But instead of seeing her for her potential, he had seen her differences, and those differences had been enough to disqualify her in his mind. Daniel's heart sank as he realized the true cost of his prejudice. It wasn't just that they had missed out on a promising hire. It was far bigger than that. It was about the missed opportunity for growth, for innovation, for progress. It was about the very essence of the company's future, the direction they could have taken had he been open-minded enough to embrace someone who didn't fit the mold. And now, that opportunity was gone, and their competitor had taken the lead. The sting of guilt grew sharper as he thought about Emma. What had she gone on to do? Had she found a place where her ideas would be heard? Or had she been shut out, too, by people who couldn't see past their own narrow perceptions? Daniel wasn't sure, but he knew that the chances of working with her again were slim. She had likely moved on, and rightfully so. The reality was clear: prejudice had cost him more than just a job candidate. It had cost him a chance to evolve, to expand his horizons, to break free from the limitations he had unknowingly placed on himself. The price of his judgment wasn't just a missed hire, it was the opportunity to be part of something bigger, something transformative. Now, all he could do was reflect on what he had lost. Transformation, true and lasting, rarely happens at the surface. It doesn't simply adjust your habits or alter your routine. No, real change happens from the very roots, at the core of your being. And for Sophia, this kind of change wasn't a gradual evolution, it was a violent shift that shook everything she believed about herself and the world around her. It started with a single question, one that reverberated through her life, forcing her to confront the deepest parts of herself. Sophia had always been a creature of habit, someone who moved through life with careful, calculated steps. She didn't make waves. She followed the rules. She had been taught that life was best lived by staying within the lines, never straying too far from what was considered safe and acceptable. She was the model employee, always punctual, always quiet, always polite. She had mastered the art of blending into the background, making sure not to attract too much attention. She told herself that she was content. But deep down, something gnawed at her. She often found herself staring out the window, wondering what it would be like to truly live. To step outside the box she had confined herself to. To take a chance. Yet, every time that thought crossed her mind, she pushed it away. Fear had been her companion for as long as she could remember. Fear of failure, fear of what others might think, fear of being judged. It had built walls around her, barriers that kept her in a world that felt secure but suffocating. Then one day, everything shifted. It happened in the middle of an ordinary conversation. She and Maria, a colleague she respected but hadn't really opened up to, were discussing a project at work. As they spoke, Maria, with her usual boldness, asked Sophia a question that seemed innocent enough. "Sophia, why do you always play it safe? Why do you hold back when you could do so much more?" The question was simple, but it hit Sophia like a lightning bolt. For a moment, she was speechless. She blinked, trying to process the words. Why did she play it safe? She had never considered that before. She had always justified her cautious nature, telling herself that it was the smart choice. It was the responsible choice. But Maria's question lingered in the air, heavy with truth. Why was she so afraid of taking risks? Why did she let fear guide her every move? That night, after the conversation, Sophia lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind raced, replaying the question over and over again. She tried to shut it out, but it wouldn't leave her. It grew louder, like a drumbeat inside her head. And the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. Her life had been built on a foundation of fear. She had chosen the safe path because it was what others expected, what society deemed acceptable. She had never allowed herself to stray from the rules, to break free from the safety of conformity. Sophia's thoughts became more turbulent, like a storm churning inside her. She realized that she had been living a life that wasn't truly hers. It was a life shaped by other people's expectations, by the pressures of society, by the need to fit in. She had spent so many years suppressing her true desires, her true potential, all because she was afraid. Afraid of what might happen if she dared to dream, if she dared to fail. The next morning, Sophia felt a change within her, something deep and profound. She woke up with a sense of unease mixed with excitement, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. It was as if a door had opened in her mind, revealing a world she had been too afraid to explore. She could no longer ignore the gnawing desire for something more. Sophia began to reflect on her life. She thought about the dreams she had buried, the passions she had ignored, the opportunities she had let slip away because she was too afraid to take risks. She had never given herself permission to fail. But what if failure wasn't the end? What if it was just a stepping stone to something greater? Her heart raced as she considered the possibilities. The idea of change, real change, was both terrifying and exhilarating. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. Sophia began to test the waters, to challenge herself in small but significant ways. She spoke up in meetings when she would normally remain silent. She took on projects she had previously turned down, fearing they would stretch her too thin. She even started to pursue interests outside of work, things she had always wanted to try but had put off, thinking she wasn't good enough. With each small risk, she felt a surge of freedom, as if she were breaking free from chains she hadn't even realized were there. But change was never easy. Doubt crept in during the quiet moments when her old fears tried to resurface, whispering in her ear that she was making a mistake, that she wasn't cut out for this kind of change. There were moments when she wanted to give up, to return to the safety of her old life, where everything was familiar and predictable. But each time the doubts arose, Sophia silenced them with newfound determination. She knew that if she wanted to grow, she had to confront her fears head-on. As the days passed, her transformation became more apparent, not just to her but to those around her. She was no longer the quiet, reserved woman who hid in the background. She was someone who dared to speak her truth, someone who embraced discomfort, someone who welcomed change. Her actions no longer came from a place of fear but from a place of possibility. She began to take ownership of her life, making decisions based on what felt true to her, not on what others expected. Sophia's transformation wasn't instant. It wasn't a smooth, linear process. It was messy, sometimes painful, and often filled with self-doubt. But through it all, she felt more alive than she ever had before. She realized that change, real change, isn't about erasing who you were. It's about embracing the parts of yourself that you've been hiding, giving yourself the freedom to evolve. And as she looked at herself in the mirror one morning, she saw someone who was finally, truly herself. A woman no longer defined by fear, but by the courage to live the life she had always dreamed of. The change that started with a single question had transformed her in ways she never thought possible. It had uprooted her from the very core, from the root of who she was, and replanted her in a new world, one where she was free to grow, free to live, and free to be who she was always meant to be. Change, especially when it is born from deep within, has an extraordinary way of spreading beyond just the individual. It's like the moment you drop a small stone into a calm pond. At first, it seems like a small and insignificant action, but the ripples stretch and grow, reaching out, touching everything in their path. This is exactly what happened to Olivia. What started as a personal transformation turned into something far greater, a force that rippled through her relationships, her workplace, and eventually her entire community. Initially, the changes within Olivia were subtle. She didn't realize that the decision to shift her mindset and her approach to life would eventually cause such an incredible impact. It began with small but important actions, decisions she had never dared to make before. At work, she started speaking up more confidently, voicing her ideas in meetings without second-guessing herself. There was a sense of power she felt as she no longer let the fear of judgment control her behavior. She stopped shrinking in the presence of others, stopped trying to fit into the mold others expected her to conform to. Her new sense of self wasn't just about asserting herself more, it was about being more aligned with who she truly was. She stopped doubting her abilities and embraced her own worth. But, in the beginning, it wasn't just her actions that changed, her internal world had shifted, too. She felt a surge of inner strength she had never experienced before. For so long, Olivia had felt like she was living on the edge of her own potential, afraid to step into the fullness of who she could be. Now, however, she was tapping into something deeper, a newfound sense of confidence and clarity that fueled her every move. At first, the changes were small. She took charge of a project that no one else wanted to handle, simply because she believed she could do it. Her decision to step up was a clear signal to her colleagues. Olivia was no longer the quiet, passive participant in the background. But what she hadn't expected was the powerful effect her actions would have on those around her. Her colleagues, initially stunned by her boldness, began to follow suit. They, too, began to speak more openly in meetings, no longer hesitating to share their ideas. A sense of openness and collaboration began to fill the office space. What had once been a place where people were afraid to express themselves, now became a hub of creativity and shared energy. The ripple of Olivia's bravery and self-assurance inspired others to take charge of their own work, to voice their thoughts, and to act with more confidence. It wasn't just her co-workers who felt the change, though. At home, the transformation Olivia was undergoing became increasingly apparent. Liam, her partner, had always supported her quietly. He was the calm, steady presence in her life. But now, he could see something different in her. There was a new vibrancy in her energy, a spark of passion that was uncontainable. As Olivia grew stronger and more assertive, their relationship evolved as well. The quiet conversations that they once had, where Olivia merely nodded and agreed, turned into deep discussions about their dreams, their futures, and their individual growth. They started sharing more openly, and Liam, inspired by her courage, began to open up more as well. It was as if the energy Olivia had cultivated in herself was now spilling over into every corner of her life. Her circle of friends, too, began to notice the shift. Olivia had always been the one who stepped back, the one who listened patiently while others took the spotlight. She had often avoided conflict, not wanting to rock the boat. But now, she found herself stepping into a leadership role, guiding her friends through challenges they were facing. She was the one who encouraged them to take risks, to follow their hearts, and to be unapologetic about who they were. As Olivia led by example, her friends began to change, too. They started to confront their own fears and insecurities, taking small steps toward their own personal growth. It was as if Olivia's transformation had awakened something in them, a desire to live more boldly and authentically. Outside of her immediate circle, Olivia's new mindset and actions began to influence the community around her. She had always wanted to contribute to something greater than herself, but she had never known where to begin. Now, she felt compelled to get involved in local causes, lending her time and energy to projects she was passionate about. At first, she thought she was just helping in small ways, but she soon realized that her involvement had a much larger impact than she had anticipated. Volunteers who had once been passive began to take charge, suggesting new ideas, and organizing events. Olivia's presence had become a catalyst for change, and her influence was spreading beyond what she had ever imagined. The transformation that Olivia had gone through wasn't just about her own personal growth, it was about the people around her. By embracing her own strength, she had unknowingly set off a powerful chain reaction. Her courage became infectious, inspiring others to take action in their own lives. And as more and more people began to shift, Olivia saw firsthand how a single person's commitment to change could create an unstoppable ripple effect. Looking back, Olivia realized that true transformation doesn't just stay confined to the individual. When one person changes, when one person dares to be authentic, it has the power to spark change in others. That change doesn't just touch the people closest to you, it ripples out, influencing your work, your relationships, and the community you're a part of. Olivia had started on her own journey of self-discovery, but in the process, she had ignited a collective movement, reminding everyone that change is not just possible, it's contagious. The consequences of one's actions are never as simple as we hope them to be. Sometimes, it feels as if the choices we make, whether driven by temptation or desperation, catch up to us in the most unexpected and painful ways. Michael stood at the crossroads of his own regret, staring down the consequences of his choices that, at one point, seemed so harmless. But now, they had grown into something far more complicated and devastating than he had ever imagined. It started with the smallest of cracks in his life, little moments of dissatisfaction at work, frustration that slowly bled into his home life. Michael was a man who had always prided himself on his control, his discipline. Yet, there were moments, fleeting ones, where the constant pressure of being everything to everyone made him feel small, insignificant. It was in these moments of vulnerability that temptation crept in. The affair had been nothing but a way to escape the mounting weight of his responsibilities. What began as a brief fling, a moment of self-indulgence, turned into an all-consuming lie, slowly eating away at his peace of mind. At first, the lies were easy to tell. He told himself that no one would find out. It was harmless, he thought. He never considered the consequences, or perhaps he was too consumed by his own desires to care. But as the affair progressed, so did the guilt. The feeling of dread that would wash over him when he kissed his wife, Claire, goodbye in the mornings. The anxious thoughts that plagued him every time he saw his children's innocent faces, knowing he had betrayed the family he swore to protect. The gnawing ache in his stomach when he thought about how far he had strayed from everything he valued. The guilt was a constant companion, a shadow that followed him no matter where he went. It clung to him in moments of silence, in the way Claire would catch him staring off into space, lost in thoughts he could no longer escape. He tried to suppress it, to push the feelings away, but the harder he tried, the more overwhelming they became. It wasn't long before Claire started to notice the subtle changes in his behavior, the way he was becoming more distant, more distracted. The once warm connection they shared now felt strained, fragile. But even then, Michael couldn't bring himself to face the truth. He couldn't acknowledge that he had done something that could shatter their lives. Then came the evening when everything fell apart. Claire, who had always been intuitive, finally confronted him, her voice calm yet laced with an undeniable sorrow. There was no shouting, no accusation, just a quiet, heart-wrenching question that cut through the air. "Michael, what's going on with us? What's happening to you?" Her words hit him like a slap to the face, and for the first time in weeks, Michael felt his world tilt dangerously off balance. The guilt that had been festering inside him finally bubbled to the surface, and the shame of his actions overwhelmed him. His heart pounded in his chest as he stood frozen, unable to speak. For a moment, he thought he could lie, deny it all, but her gaze, full of hurt and confusion, stopped him in his tracks. The weight of his decisions pressed on him like a physical force, squeezing the breath from his lungs. He tried to apologize, stammering words of regret, but they felt empty, rehearsed, as if he was trying to convince himself as much as he was trying to convince her. Claire's eyes never left his, but there was no anger in them, only sadness. The truth was clear. She knew. She had known for a while now. The distance between them, once small and manageable, had grown into an unbridgeable chasm. The trust that had been the foundation of their relationship was gone, and no amount of apologies could restore it. Michael could see the damage in her eyes, the flicker of pain as she absorbed the betrayal. He had never imagined that the consequences would hit so hard, so quickly. He thought he had more time, that he could fix things before they spiraled out of control. But there was no magic fix. There was no turning back from the truth now. He had lost the right to make things right just with his words. The damage was already done. In the days that followed, Michael found himself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. Every time he tried to reach out to Claire, to explain himself, to make her understand, she withdrew further. Her silence, her coolness, it was the worst punishment of all. He realized then that it wasn't just about the affair. It was about the years of trust he had torn apart in one reckless moment. It was about the love he had taken for granted, thinking it would always be there no matter how far he strayed. Every interaction felt awkward, strained. When they were in the same room, it was as if there was a wall between them, one that Michael had built with his lies. The guilt that had once been a quiet whisper now roared in his ears, and every passing day made it clearer, he could never undo what he had done. The consequences were not just the broken pieces of his marriage, they were the shattered pieces of his own identity, his own self-worth. The man he had been before, the man he had prided himself on being, was no longer there. But as time went on, Michael began to understand that the consequences weren't just about feeling bad or being punished. They were a reckoning. A way for him to face the very parts of himself he had been running from for so long. He realized that, in order to heal, he would have to make real, tangible changes. He couldn't just apologize and expect everything to go back to normal. He had to prove through his actions that he was willing to earn back the trust he had lost. He started going to therapy, working on himself in ways he had never done before. Slowly, Michael began to piece together the parts of his life that had crumbled. He knew it wouldn't be easy, that it would take time, but he was finally willing to face the consequences of his choices head-on. It was a painful process, one filled with moments of doubt, frustration, and sorrow. But it was also the beginning of something new. Michael knew that no matter how long it took, he had to confront the pain he had caused, not just for Claire, but for himself. Only then could he truly begin to rebuild. Lily had always dreamt of achieving something extraordinary, something that would mark her place in the world. But as she stood on the edge of what could be the most defining moment of her life, she felt a strange, heavy weight settle in her chest. It wasn't fear of failure that caused her discomfort, but something far deeper, an overwhelming sense of responsibility, a burden that stretched far beyond her own personal ambitions. She realized, with startling clarity, that what she was about to embark on was far greater than her individual success. This wasn't just about her dreams, this was about something bigger, a mission that transcended her own desires. Growing up, Lily had been taught that real fulfillment didn't come from the accumulation of accolades or the pursuit of personal glory. Her parents, community leaders themselves, had always told her that true success came from the service of others. They had instilled in her the belief that sometimes, the most profound achievements were not those that came with fame or recognition but those that left a lasting impact on the world. But despite these teachings, Lily had always believed that success could still be personal, that she could balance her dreams with helping others. However, as the moment to lead an ambitious community project drew near, she understood that the stakes had become far higher than she could have ever imagined. the initiative she was about to lead wasn't just a small charitable endeavor, it was something that had the potential to reshape the lives of countless individuals. People were looking to her not only for guidance but for a sense of hope. Her leadership wasn't just about strategy or organization, it was about carrying the weight of a vision that could change everything. The pressure was immense, and Lily's pulse quickened as she surveyed the team assembled before her. These were people who had volunteered their time, their energy, and their faith in her vision. She was their leader, their beacon of hope. And she wasn't just leading a group of volunteers, she was leading a mission that could give voice to the voiceless, lift up the forgotten, and create an opportunity for a better life for so many. Her heart beat loudly in her chest as she faced the team. They were waiting for her to speak, waiting for her to inspire them, to instill in them the same fervor she felt for the mission. But as she looked at their expectant faces, something shifted within her. The weight of their trust, the hope they had placed in her, felt like a heavy mantle she was only beginning to understand. This wasn't just about her, this was about them, their hopes, and the futures they could shape together. She was no longer the girl trying to carve out a name for herself in the world. She was now part of something far larger, something that demanded sacrifice, resilience, and unwavering belief. When she finally spoke, her voice wavered at first, uncertain. "We're here today because we believe in a cause bigger than ourselves. This isn't about any one of us, it's about those we're here to serve. It's about those who don't have the voices to speak for themselves, the opportunities to succeed, or the resources to thrive. It's about creating a world where no one is forgotten, no one is left behind." Her words felt raw, stripped of any pretense, as though she was speaking to herself as much as to the team. The mission had grown so much larger than anything she had imagined, and it had become clear that it demanded more than just her skills. It required her heart, her complete dedication, and her willingness to sacrifice her own comfort for the greater good. Every step they took, every decision they made, carried the weight of lives that could be changed forever. In that moment, Lily understood that leadership wasn't just about being the loudest voice in the room or having the best ideas, it was about understanding the needs of those around her and ensuring that the mission remained the focus. As the days went by, the gravity of her responsibility settled deeper into her bones. Every morning, as Lily prepared for the day ahead, she couldn't help but feel the enormity of what she was trying to accomplish. There were times when doubt crept into her mind, when she questioned whether she was truly the right person for the job. The world wasn't kind to idealists, and the road ahead was filled with obstacles. What if she failed? What if the people she was trying to help didn't believe in the vision, didn't trust her leadership? What if the dream she had fought for wasn't enough to overcome the forces that worked against it? But with each challenge she faced, Lily found a strength she never knew she had. She realized that the fear of failure was no longer a luxury she could afford. There were people depending on her, and there was a community that needed her to stay strong. She had to find the courage to press forward, even when it seemed impossible. Every setback, every moment of doubt, became an opportunity to push harder, to find new ways to innovate, and to inspire the team around her to dig deeper into their own reservoirs of strength. One afternoon, when the weight of it all felt unbearable, Lily took a moment to step outside. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the city, and she found herself standing at the edge of a small park, overlooking the people she was trying to help. She watched as children played, as families gathered in small groups, and as the world continued to turn. For a moment, everything was still. The world felt so much bigger than her fears, her doubts, and her ambitions. It was as if the entire universe was telling her that she had to keep going, not for herself, but for them. The next day, Lily gathered her team once again, her resolve stronger than ever. "We're not doing this for ourselves," she said, her voice firm and sure. "We're doing this because the world deserves better. We're doing this because there are people out there who are counting on us. We're doing this because we can make a difference." The mission was no longer just about the project, it was about the heart and soul of the community, and the lives they could change if they all worked together. As the project gained momentum, Lily saw how deeply her team believed in the cause, how they had come to embody the mission itself. It was no longer just her vision, it was theirs too. Together, they had forged something greater than any individual effort. In the end, the project was a success, not just because of the tangible results, but because of the lives that had been touched. Lily had learned that true leadership wasn't about personal glory or recognition. It was about putting others first, about leading with integrity, and about understanding that sometimes, the best way to succeed is to let go of the notion of success itself. It was about embracing a mission greater than the self, something that would live on long after the project was completed. And for Lily, that was enough.